Special edition of Lazy Booking going live right now with this man down here, the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan. Like, subscribe, follow. Let's roll.
Let's go! This ain't the box like or this game can heat stink!
Oh shit!
It's gone!
There we go. Oh, I'm like a rookie here. I got on mute here. Lazy Booking coming at you guys live here on A2DRadio.com. Appreciate you guys joining us for a special Friday night edition of Lazy Booking. I'm Chrome here with my buddy Andy from In This Very Ring, who, by the way, you guys can catch tomorrow to talk about a very eventful week in professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. And we are very, very fortunate to have our special guest today, one of the real true pro wrestling legends, and a guy who's he's got his fingerprints all over one of the, if not the biggest era in the history of professional wrestling, all through the Monday Night Wars, the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan. We're going to talk to Kevin momentarily, but first we have to pay a couple of bills. And Andy, who are we paying tonight?
We are thanking Dr. Paul Vidal and his team at Specialized Physical Therapy, LLC. Check him out, 2 locations, Burlington, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. He's our doc. Make him yours, Dr. Paul Vidal at SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com.
All right, beautiful. So our topic of conversation, we're going to talk through Kevin's career. We're going to talk about a lot of the famous stories, too, that Kevin's been around and get some insight from him. But our first topic, and I can't think of a better person to have a conversation with this about, and it's competition between pro wrestling companies is what's best for pro wrestling. Agree, disagree? Again, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on A2D Radio tonight.
You know, I don't do a lot of these, but because I've been chosen, and hopefully I'll stand up to what you guys want. A to D is the premier wrestling show on the air today. So, guys, thanks very much for having me.
Your kind words are way, way too nice. A lot of people would probably tell you we're 2 a-holes over here, but I'm just kidding. But listen, thank you so much, Kevin, again. And I want to jump right in to that topic of conversation. You're somebody who worked for the Crockett's, you worked NWA, WCW. You were there with when the two companies went head to head, WCW and WWE, and now we're seeing a resurgence of companies. And now with the change of regime, we're really starting to see the irons light up between the companies. So, do you agree or disagree that competition is what's best for the pro wrestling business?
Competition is great for any business, whether it's McDonald's against Burger King or it's Sears against any other hardware store. Competition is what drives the products to be better. And I would hate to think that we would go back to one company. When you said the new regime, I've watched their product lately because they kind of lost me, truthfully.
They lost all of us.
Yeah, and I watched their product, and Kevin Nash and I are good friends. I actually sent them a text and I said, I wonder if your fingerprints are on that because I see sensible stuff being laid out. And I'm glad to see they're going back to using the word wrestling. So hopefully it will inspire A&E too to raise their game. I follow them and I follow wrestling because that's all I've done my whole adult life. And I think that rising tides rise all the ships. So I'm hoping that a a yeah, what a what's it called? AEW? No, AW,
Yep,
right?
you got it. You got it.
A little,
AEW. Yep.
yeah, a little late tonight for me. I just did 2 signings. Uh, AEW, I hope that they respond, and I'm sure they will because they got a lot of great talent. They got a lot of great talent. Uh, let me ask you guys a question: is that Friday night show helping them at all? Do you think? Is it Rampage?
I'll go first, Andy. I think that it has in certain scenarios, like when they do. Sometimes they'll do almost like you guys used to do a Clash of the Champions. They
Yeah,
do themed shows that are almost like a free pay-per-view that carry over to both nights. And in those instances, I think it helps. A lot of it, though, it started out when it first started. I felt like they made a concerted effort to make it mean something. However, I feel like it's almost done what WWE did with like superstars and main event,
yeah.
and now it's just kind of become a, you know, you do get some good quality matches, but in terms of continuing storylines, I don't see anything major that makes it must see. I don't know how you feel, Andy.
Okay,
No, I'd have to agree to that because, uh, like we talk about it every single week. We never bring up Rampage because there's never anything worth noting. I mean, from aside from a Jade Cargill match here or there lately, there's really hasn't been anything of note. All this has created is the environment where there's wrestling from, 8 o'clock on the East Coast to what, almost 11 of midnight time frame. So it's a Friday night full of wrestling, but that's all it's done. It hasn't benefited AEW or any particular person in one way or shape or form.
let me throw something out at you.
Sure.
When they bought Ring of Honor, and it doesn't look like they found a place to place it yet, right?
Hmm.
Why wouldn't they put Ring of Honor on Friday night?
I agree with you
Absolutely.
wholeheartedly. It makes sense.
He owns both companies, and if you, and the thing that I worry about, and I have no reason to worry about it because they're going to do what they want to do. But if you put that Ring of Honor on a Friday night and kept it separate, no crossovers, no
Hmm.
crossovers, and almost made it where the heels or baby faces were saying, we're Ring of Honor, we're better than any wrestling in the world, right? And the AEW guys said the same thing. What if a year and a half from now, or they pick a time like in April, it's WrestleMania. They pick a time away from WrestleMania. If WrestleMania is April, I'm just picking a date out of my head. We'll say they pick the week after the 4th of July, or they go Thanksgiving. You know, time when Thanksgiving used to be the biggest night of the year for wrestling. People have eaten, there's nothing to do. What if they had a pay per view like in the World Series, the best 4 out of 7, and they had a Super Bowl trophy, and each year the guys that won it, the 4 matches that were winners were engraved on the trophy, and they could brag about it for a year.
Yeah, it's similar to what WWE did at one point, where they had the bragging rights pay per view. But I would even go in as far as to say, I don't want to say that Ring of Honor should be a developmental for for AEW, because there's a lot of really talented people that could work in WWE or AEW. I mean, their world champion is Claudio, and he's phenomenal. I mean, one of the best wrestlers in the world.
Can I
Um,
just interrupt you, Mike?
sure.
The more you see Claudio, the more you appreciate him.
Hmm.
I am amazed by the guy. If I was going to design a wrestler for this era, he'd be the guy I designed. He's so entertaining, so innovative, And I don't know if some of the nuances he does that you guys would pick it up, but the rest of the wrestling fans who aren't as deep into wrestling like we are,
Mhm.
his selling in his hands and facial expressions. He tells a story without even wrestling. He is something special. And how WWE let him go is beyond me. They let money walk out the door.
I would agree with you, and I think if Hunter was in power, I don't think that would have happened. I think that when I look at Claudio, to your point, why he fits today, you know, the idea of the everybody has to be huge, like what Vince envisioned wrestling, he almost fits that in a sense of his physique and his power, but he's so athletic. And like you said, in terms of the selling and telling the storytelling within a match, he's one of the best. I why he didn't work in WWE. I think for Vince, I don't think Vince loved his promo style. If you're asking my opinion, and
Right.
unfortunately, I think and I think why he lost us. And Andy, you might agree with this. I think Vince probably lost a lot of us because if you look at over the last 2 or 3 years, especially, he's built the company and where every show the driving force has been Roman Reigns and Bianca Belair. And I don't have an issue with it being Bianca Belair, and I love Roman. But when you put everything behind that, everything on the outside is suffering. And I don't know if you know this, the Intercontinental Championship being defended at their next pay-per-view next Saturday. This is the first time since last year's WrestleMania 37, that title, the prestigious title, has been defended on a pay-per-view since then. So that should tell you where Vince's priorities were. And now Hunter's coming back in and he's giving guys who would be in Claudio's, um, I
Sphere.
guess his
His
tier
sphere.
of,
Yeah, his
yeah,
sphere. Yeah.
those type of guys. He's featuring them. He's featuring the secondary titles and putting a new emphasis back on that. So
Well,
I agree with you.
Andy, let me ask you something.
Sure.
Do you think, and Mike said Vince didn't like his promos? Okay, he's to me one of the greatest wrestlers I've ever seen, not just in this era.
Right.
Can't you put your finger in the dike by giving him a mouthpiece?
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about it in the past, where having somebody like Zeb Coulter was phenomenal for him, or the month he was a Paul Heyman guy, that was great. That was the start of what could have been a championship run for him, especially somebody like Paul Heyman. Put a mouthpiece on Claudio if you don't like his promos, and
Right,
you've got, to your point, Kevin. You said he's the wrestler you would design.
right.
You've got the mold for a good championship run, a great build with anybody because he could work with anybody. That's what's so great about somebody like Claudio. He was versatile to work the quick matches, the slow matches, whatever he needed to do.
Mike, when you said he wasn't a giant like Vince envisioned, when I went to Florence, Italy, and saw the statue of David, Michelangelo's masterpiece, Claudio
Hmm.
fits that body type, the
It's
ultimate body,
unbelievable.
the ultimate body type. Let me throw this out at both of you. Mouthpiece, something that was completely different. MVP.
Yes.
I think
MVP.
MVP has been phenomenal. I think
That's
I love Bobby Lashley. I always like Bobby Lashley. I think Bobby could cut his own promos, but the work that those two did while Bobby was on
right.
that run was next level. Where, like you said, you could put him up in the tiers of the Bobby Heenans and
Right.
the Paul Heymans and those likes who. I mean, he was next level.
I'm not pushing him because he's a dear friend of mine. I knew him before. I one time offered him $75,000 when he was working independence. I said, "You, because you're going to make it, be a great investment." But the great thing is the clash of way they look Claudio looks like an athlete, but he looks like a blue-collar athlete. MVP wears all the gold with the 305 area code, which is Miami.
Mm-hmm.
He brings that little bit of tilt to how did a Miami kid get this great athlete who probably doesn't even drink a beer? There's a little underneath story to tell there.
Yeah.
You know,
No,
so
I think it's great.
I would love to see that happen.
Even now, AEW,
Yeah.
I mean, he can talk, but AEW also has William Regal there with him. And William Regal is another guy who, I mean, all the work he did in NXT, and I mean, to me, I don't know how you feel about this, Kevin. You know, you hear about how much Dusty affected people over all the years, and I almost feel like William Regal has become this new generation's Dusty, in that all the work he's put into them. And how he's affected. I mean, you talk to the Johnny Garganos, and you talk to the Charlottes and Sasha Bankses and all these people who worked with Dusty and who worked with Regal and Bianca Belair's. Everybody raves about the effect that William Regal has had on their career. Bryan Danielson is another one. I mean, I think AEW got it right in putting him in the right spot to bring him in with that faction that Regal's running over there.
Yeah, and I really like Regal. I had the pleasure of working with him. He's a very intelligent guy. I can't say enough about him, but for you guys to see that he's close to Dusty. Dusty was the guy that made me. And Dusty had a vision that Dusty was the first guy that created the big shows. You know, whether it was the Battle of the Belts, whether it was the Orange Bowl, whether it was Starcade, Bunkhouse Battle Royal. Dusty thought he was going to be the next Steven Spielberg, right? And he was brilliant. And I see that in Regal too. And just for my own satisfaction, I like to go to Europe on vacations. And Blackpool is a very unique place. You know, it's freezing cold over there in England. They have this big amusement park on the boardwalk, but it's still got kind of atmosphere. I would love for them to go over there and walk into the freak shows and go and train with the boxers, the MMA guys, and go to Wiggins. I know you guys know about that, right? It's the snake pit where all the tough guys came from.
Yep.
Regal had been. Boy, if we opened up some of our minds and looked at, I just got a little battery. We saw that the world has shrunk so greatly, but it's still interesting. Like there's travel channels and the Discovery Channel, and I watch the one with the Alaskan people that live up in the North Pole. You're mesmerized by what you don't see every day. I think if they did that, it would separate them completely. And that's just me throwing something out there. But getting back to Regal, I saw it when he was in WCW. He would teach guys. And he had, that wasn't his job. And he was very, very smart. I'm glad to see him at AEW. And there was another guy that if Hunter got the job a little earlier, he wouldn't be gone.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys I think would still be there. Talent in ring and behind the scenes for sure. And I mean, I know that Regal was Hunter's guy, and I'm sure, if all things considered and things could have worked out how I'm sure Hunter would like it, Regal would still be his right hand man there. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
But Kevin, I want to dive in we're gonna dive into your career a little bit. So are you still active?
No, wrestling?
Yeah, I think it's
No.
been a couple years, right?
Oh, no, it's been I did one match with Brian Pillman Jr. about 3 years ago just because of Brian Pillman Jr.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I haven't been in the ring in 5 or 6 years. And
Okay.
when I was in the ring before that, it was smoke and mirrors. I mean, you gotta know I'm not Rick. I'm not able to go out there. I'll be a broken glass. But you know, it's better sometimes to know when the end is there and not try to fool yourself. So
Uh,
yeah, but
I think that's a fair
I did
point.
it for Brian because my respect for the Brian Jr. and because of my closeness with Brian Sr.
Yeah. So you haven't been in the ring in a while, and well, so congratulations on a phenomenal career
Thank you.
spanning almost 50 years.
It's going to be 50 years. It'll be 52 years
Yeah.
uh,
Oh wow.
next in the next couple of months.
You,
But
you
I
got
mean,
you got rolling in the 70s, right? And so
yeah,
you're from the
1950.
Boston area.
Right. I'm from Boston originally.
So you got a lot of your early years were in the Florida territory. But let me ask you this first. What exactly got you into pro wrestling? Was this something that you wanted to do when you were younger? And if so, who were your influences?
Okay.
Um, and just tell us about your introduction into the professional wrestling industry.
You're not going to believe this story. If you heard anything close to this, tell me. I I was as a kid. Wrestling was on TV in Boston as a child, and I was fascinated by it. My dad was a Boston cop, and he got free tickets, of course, and we went to the matches. I saw Killer Kowalski, Pepper Gomez, all the super greats in that era, the 60s. But then I took up amateur wrestling. I wrestled for 10 years. And I kind of lost it, because I said, oh, it's different. So, right before I'm going to get into the story, the meat of the story, Jim Nance, do you guys know the name? Was a fullback for the Boston Patriots. He wrestled
I
at Syracuse.
I do. I don't think Andy does. He's not a big sports buff.
Okay, Andy, he wrestled at Syracuse. He was national champion in his sophomore and senior year, but the three at that time you could only wrestle varsity or play sports from sophomore to senior. He
Okay.
was never taken off his feet,
Oh wow.
and I was a big amateur wrestling fan, and he was going to be the referee in a Bruno match, and I went to the matches, and this is when we hadn't had wrestling on TV in Boston itself, but it would dip in from Providence, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. So I kind of said, "Oh, I got to go to it and see Jim Nance." But on the card was the Sheik, the original. And
The
I'm watching
original
the
Sheik.
matches. I'm watching the matches, and they're doing the tag team matches where a guy gets tied up in the ropes, and they pick him up. Albano and Altamore, one of them's tied up to the ropes. The baby faces pick the other guy up and use him as a battering ram, and I know that's bullshit. I know that guys are pulling guys down by the hair. That ain't going to happen. And that laid a pretty good foundation because I never pulled a guy down by his hair in my whole career or pulled his tights because it doesn't work. So when I saw the Sheik come out, he was wrestling, I believe, either Mario Milano or Thursday. I actually felt the building move. And I said, I don't care if wrestling's fakes, this guy's real. So he got me hooked up with it. So now I got the craze of professional wrestling, but I'm still wrestling amateur. So at the time, I was wrestling for the Cambridge YMCA, the Waltham Boys Club, and the Boston it was called the Boston YMCA Union. It wasn't YMCA. It was YMCA Union, second oldest athletic club in the United States. The oldest one is the New York Athletic Club. So I used to go down there and I wrestled for them, and we bunch of amateur wrestlers in the off season would go down and work out together. So one day, this guy, 180 pounds, walks in, and guys would sit on the mats, and then they, okay, you want to come in? Yeah, come in. So he said, I was in, and he said, can I come in? I said, sure. So we started working out, and I started working out with him. The guy had graduated from Oxford University in London and Harvard Business School.
Oh, wow.
He was. You remember? I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember Arrow shirts, the button-down collar shirts. He was a male model for them. He was on Days of Our Life or As the World Turns, or one of them. He was a star on that. Handsome as the son of a gun. So we wrestled that first day, and he said, hey, he knew I was a snot-nosed kid, and he said, hey, they had a cafeteria there. He said, let me buy you lunch for working on it. So we worked out. So we did it about 2 or 3 days, and then the fourth time, we go down. He's going to buy me lunch again. He says, so I said, Peter, what's your story? He said, I want to be a professional wrestler more than anything, but I can't be. I said, well, why can't you be? He said, I'm from South Africa. My family's the DeBerry family, the Diamond family. They owned, 3/4 of all the diamonds in the world at that time.
Holy
He
moly.
said, it's beneath my stature for them. They're embarrassed. I actually was going to go start my career in South Africa with Bull Heffron because him and Bull were friends. So what happened was we started talking more about pro wrestling. He said to me, would you like to try to be a pro wrestler? I said, yeah, but I wouldn't know how to get into it. And he said, well, I wrestle these small shows. They're not on television. And I said, well, where are they? He said, one of them's in Montreal. The other one's in Brooklyn and Williamsburg. This is when Brooklyn was tough. 234 Broadway, upstairs of the gym. So I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And then he said, well, let's go to Montreal first. So I go to Montreal. I get there. I meet Pat Gerard, who wrestled in Europe as Pat Curry. If you look him up, he was the #1 box office attraction, like in the 40s and 50s. He had a chauffeured Rolls Royce. So I meet him. He says, yeah, we'll give you a try. He didn't know I had never been in the ring because Peter wrestled for him almost every weekend. So I'm sitting in the dressing room, and I know, I know this isn't an amateur wrestling match. So I said, Peter, somebody going to tell me what to do? I had never been in a ring. He said, yeah, sure. He called the referee over and says, hey, what's Kevin supposed to do? Oh, by the way, Pat Gerard trained Ronnie Garvin. He trained Pat Patterson. He trained, helped home Edward Carpentier when he came there. Helped the Giant.
Wow. A lot of that big Canadian talent. Wow.
Yeah, the Vachons and the Rougeaus. And that's when this was an unusual thing. That's when the Rougeaus and the Vachons were running against one another. And one weekend, one of them on a Friday night drew 25,000 people at Gerard Park. And the other night, they drew 27,000. But they let the guys work for Pat on a Sunday because that's how much respect he had. So one of Rougeau's big baby faces was a French-Canadian named Fernand Fichette. But when he came to wrestle for Pat, he wore a mask, and he just helped the young guys around. So first match goes, I asked before the show starts, the first match is on. I said to Peter, when are they going to tell me? He said, he called the referee again. Yeah, I'll be with it in a minute. Now it's the second match, and Peter goes out. I'm just standing there like a bump on a log. Nobody comes by me. I don't see Fernand. the bell rings. I come to Peter. I said, nobody told me anything. He said to the referee, when are you going to tell Kevin something? He said, I'll tell him in the ring. I get in the ring. Nothing said. This guy's a real pro for an ad shed. He drew money. So first thing is I tie up. I knew how to tie up because amateur. And I half-assed flying man. But I thought, what do I do now? I panicked. So I reached back and kicked him in the head.
Oh.
So, and I mean, there was no work to it. And I could tell in his head, he said, that hurt. And he rolled out on the apron and he stood up grabbing the top rope. And you know the old bullshit spot where you pull the guy in over the top rope and slingshot him in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew I was supposed to do something like that. But I hit the ropes, the opposite ropes, and came off for about 30 miles an hour, and I was 225. And I knocked him 3 rows back.
Oh.
He got up, pulled his mask off, and started swearing in French, Tabernacle, Commando we. And I thought, oh, God. So he says, he waves the match off and starts walking back to the dressing room. I jump on the second rope, and I'm pleading, come back, please come back. The English-speaking people are saying, what the hell is going on? So the referee scoots out of the ring. I'm there by myself, and I said, uh-oh, this isn't good. You're going to either have to fight for your life or you're going to get your ass kicked. I walk back in. There he is and says, what was that? I said, nobody told me anything. This is the first match I've ever had. The referee walked by him, and he snatched the referee by the throat and said, you didn't tell this kid anything? And he said, no. He said, he could have killed me or I could have killed him. Let the referee go. And he said to me, you here next week? I said, yeah. He said, come 3 hours early and we're going to work out. And after that, I went down to Brooklyn, and I was the only Anglo in the gym. There was Pedro Morales. There was Ramon Perez. There was Johnny Rods. There was Victor Rivera. And I was the only Anglo in the gym. And they all treated me great. And after that, it's funny. It's almost like full circle. I'm here in West Virginia signing autographs this weekend. And West Virginia was a territory back then, and they sent me to West Virginia.
Oh, wow.
So
wow.
It's a freaky thing. I was never trained, nothing.
Wow. That is a crazy. So I did know that your first match was in Montreal, but I've never heard the story behind it. That is a fascinating story.
Yeah.
And talk about having some big name guys around you too to kind of
Yeah.
get you acclimated after that insane first experience.
Well, I got to give you a sidebar story too. Peter had a apartment on 47th Street. Jackie Kennedy lived across the street. So he brings me to he had like a 5, those huge apartments they have in New York City. We get in, the elevator comes up, it goes into his kitchen. We get out of this kitchen. He has a maid and a cook. They're going to cook. There's this rack of imported wine. I'm saying, God, these wrestlers live great. Huh? I didn't know 6 months later I'd be in West Virginia with a bologna blowout, a 6-pack of beer, and bologna and a white bread and cheese.
So you were in the Florida territory, and Andy, I think you had a question.
So you get into the Florida territory and you start doing the whole Prince of Darkness thing. Kind of walk me through how that came about, how it was pitched to you.
No, it wasn't pitched to me. I came up with it completely.
Okay.
How it happened was I had been in Knoxville, Tennessee. Blackjack Mulligan and Flair owned the territory. And Blackjack Mulligan made me the booker there. So Barry had just started. We had Terry Taylor as a babyface. We had Tim Horner. We had Blackjack Mulligan. And we would have guys come in and out. The original Dick the Bruiser came in. Brody was coming in. John Studd was in there for like 4 months in the big shots after that because of Mulligan's connections. So I became a heel and I had a feud with the Mulligans. So when I came back to Florida, the dressing room was split between the baby faces and me. The Mulligan clan, meaning Mulligan, Barry, Kendall, Steve Kern, because I had a feud with Steve Kern in Atlanta off of the TBS, and in Memphis and in Knoxville. They're all saying, this guy's no good. This guy is not the guy you once remember. Steve Kerr made this passionate interview to Mike Graham. The three of us were dear friends. He's not the same Mike. Mike stood up for me. Mike, Magnum TA, a couple of other guys, babyfaces, stood up for me. So I said, hey, you guys, I'm not proud of what I did, but Mulligan, you got no right. You live in a glass house. You can't throw stones at me. So I was a stone cold baby face that I was misunderstood. I was asking for redemption. So the Florida title was vacant. Barry and I wrestled for the Florida title. Mike Graham was the special commentator with Gordon Soley. So we wrestled 56 minutes in the summertime at 106 North Albany when it was like 104 degrees. Jeez. So at the 50-minute mark, I went to leg dive. Now we're doing all kinds of chain wrestling, babyface wrestling, hip tosses and backdrops. Not a punch has been thrown. I go to leg dive Barry. Barry scoots out of the way. I go to the floor. As I'm coming back in, Barry holds the ropes open. I step through the ropes, and we continue wrestling. At the 56-minute mark, 6 minutes later, Barry goes to leg dive me. I scoot out of the way, and he tumbles to the floor. I hold the ropes open. When he walks through the ropes, bends through the ropes to come in, I kick him in the face. I cover him 1, 2, 3. Now I get the belt, and Mike Graham goes from praising me to saying, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" And Mike had these Levi's jeans, and I don't know if you remember this at all, but they used to have buttons instead of zippers on the fly. So I said, I got to make this look good. So Mike was yelling at me beside Gordon. I took that belt, and I really laced him with it. I knocked him ass over tea kettle. Mike was a tough guy. He took that bump, and he got around. He was so mad, he started to chase me on the desk. But he had blown his buttons in his pants down by his knees. So I escaped. So what I did was, I got, every week I would do a little something different. Like, I didn't start the character at S. I started at A. Misunderstood. Had problems. And then I started to put a little bit darker makeup. Just a slight underneath my eyes. You got to remember, this is MTV first started. All the horror movies were big. Alien, Predator, remakes of Frankenstein, Billy Idol, White Wedding, Thriller. We can go down the line. And then I got a promo, and this wasn't supposed to happen. I went out and did a promo and said, the biggest star, maybe in the world, but definitely in Florida, has been lying to you. There's no American dream. You people watching this TV or on the couch, you got 2 kids, your work is maybe going to let you go. You got payments, you're living check to check. How's the American dream? Yeah, it's American dream for him because he goes all over the world making a lot of money, and he's having you contribute to his money. And it got to Dusty so good, he had the intuitive this. He came back out and rebutted me, and we were off and running. and each week I did a little bit darker and darker and darker. So by the time I got to S, it was like must-see TV. What is he going to do, and what's Dusty going to do to rebuttal him? So, I mean, and I had the greatest baby faces of all times to work with. Blackjack, Barry Windham, and I want everybody to listen to what I'm going to say. I want you to go to YouTube's and Barry in the early 80s. Ric Flair puts him as the number 3 babyface he ever worked with. To me, he's the greatest babyface, technically, I ever worked with. So I had Blackjack, I had Barry, I had Dusty, I had Superstar Billy Graham, I had Andre, I had all these giants that were willing to sacrifice for me. And I was very, very lucky because after we shot the angle with Barry, I was booked that Sunday in Orlando against Blackjack. He was going to teach me a lesson. And Dusty, and back those in Orlando, you couldn't really go from dressing room to dressing room, but we met earlier. And Blackjack said to Dusty, "What do you want for the finish?" And he said, "Well, let's work a DQ." And Blackjack says, "No. What we're going to do is he's going to beat me and leave me laying. Kendall is going to hit the ring. He's going to drop Kendall. Barry's going to hit the ring. He's going to drop Barry." And he said, "Dream, you're going to come to make a big save, but he's going to drop you too." So that night, and they filmed it, that night I left the whole family, which they call themselves, laying. I couldn't have done it if they didn't say, "Let's got to go with the guy." And I couldn't have got a stronger rocket on my ass than that. You know what I mean? The 4 top baby faces. And I was very lucky. I mean, I was a friend of Andre, and Andre, we had a match designed that was about 6 minutes, and he would sell for me. And it was incredible that these guys, and Superstar, he'd come off of his run as the world champion in New York. He was great with me. I just had a lucky career because I had guys that really, I don't know if they saw something, but they knew to put their egos aside and really push me, and I was lucky.
Yeah, and listen, you worked with a lot of great talent,
Yeah,
both as opponents together. When you talk about, the Prince of Darkness, you had Luna around you, you had
yeah.
Nancy around you. Then you went on, I believe it was called the Slaughterhouse, the Cactus Jack, and a lot of different people you worked with.
Buzz
But I
Sawyer.
have Buzz Sawyer. I have to ask about the faction though, the Dungeon of Doom. I have to ask about the Dungeon of Doom because when I was young then. I was probably about 10 years old when the Dungeon of Doom was kicking into high gear,
Right.
and I'm gonna be honest. I couldn't stand your guts because you were going after my guy Hulk.
Yeah.
You were getting to my guy Savage, uncensored in the different tiered cage and everything. So, but I want to talk about that group because it was a very fascinating group, and you had guys who had success in New York with very defined characters. When you talk about the Brutus Beefcake character, and
Right.
then he was the Zodiac, and then you had obviously John Tenta, Earthquake. He came in as Shark. There were a lot of very defined, and at that time also a very young, very green, very fresh Paul White as the Giant.
Right.
Can you talk about the formation of that group, and also can you tell us about working with a young Big Show, a young Paul White? Because I imagine you had a lot of, I'm sure you probably had a lot of responsibility in helping him to kind of come along in those early days.
Well, let me tell you what my idea was. When Hogan made me the booker, went to Eric and said, "This is the guy." And he said, "Can you do it?" I said, "I think I can take you to the promised land." So all of a sudden, though, I looked at Hogan. And if you remember when Hogan first came, This wasn't the Hulk Hogan of WrestleMania 1 or 2. He was 60 pounds lighter. He became a movie star, right?
He was very, very lean.
Very lean. He was skinny.
Mhm.
And he had been injured. And he lost his confidence, I believe, because he was hunched over when he did his promos. He was very skinny. So he brought those guys in that you mentioned, who were great people. And the reason why he wanted to be comfortable, he wanted to go back to what he knew. And I said to myself, if I lump us all together, I'm only taking up one segment. I'm trying to get back to like real, more serious things. But I understood that what Hulkmania was. And I said, if we lump them together, we can be a little bit more showbiz and entertaining. Because the moment he came back, after a couple of months, there was a little bit of rumbling in the audience that he wasn't getting the response that he used to get. And I said right there, eventually I want to turn him heel. My long range plan was to turn him heel. And I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want people to get into his ear before it was too soon. But I lumped those guys together. Someone asked me a very interesting question today when I was trying to autograph. They said, if you would have taken 3 guys for the Dungeon of Doom, who would they have been? And I said, Ming, Barbarian, and Paul Orndorff.
Wow.
You know, with Paul was one of the greatest heels of all time. So he doesn't
He was
get credit.
phenomenal.
He had a different gear. When he had a guy, I want people, while we're talking on this show, I want them to go to YouTube of Paul Orndorff. When he get a guy in the corner and start kicking him, went from first gear to second gear to third to fourth, and then he had fifth and sixth. He had a body like nobody. He looked like an athlete. He was a pro athlete. I mean, and him and Hogan should have had a bigger run in my mind. You know, remember when the run was over, and then a year later they went to Toronto, and they drew 60,000 people, and they thought they were going to draw about 15.
Mhm.
But putting them with Ming and Barb, it would have been a no-brainer. I mean, that would have been legit. But getting to Paul was one of the few guys that I knew and have seen that he had so much confidence in himself. I don't think he understood that he was green. He was talking like after a second match, he was talking like he'd been in the business 20 years. You know what I mean? But he was willing to listen. But he has had a remarkable career, drew nothing but money, a very nice man. But, you know, as we're going to get into the interview, I was right from the time I knew Hogan wasn't Hogan as a babyface, because they were in the most iconic group of guys of all times.
Yeah, the New World Order, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, since we're at WCW at this point, Kevin, I want to get your thoughts on Eric Bischoff. You know, Bischoff comes in and runs WCW, and then he goes away for a little bit, and they bring him back, you know, especially towards the end of WCW. What are your raw thoughts on Eric Bischoff?
Eric Bischoff, I was asked that question a little while ago. You know, they said, how did he get the job? How he got the job was they had gone through wrestlers, Ole Anderson, George Scott, Dusty, Bill Watts. When Eric came in and applied for the job, they looked at him as a businessman, not somebody from the wrestling world. He presented himself well. He was I hear people knock Eric, and some of the people that knock Eric were making $500,000 to $1 million a year, and I don't understand. Eric did think out of the box. The reason why was he wasn't ingrained in the wrestling for 20 years. He had come in as an announcer for AWA, and he hadn't been fallen into a wrestling pattern. And he went to Japan, saw the angle, the New World Order angle in Japan, knew it could work. Him and I went to Hawaii. We brokered the deal with the Japanese, with Saito and Hattori for New Japan, where you talk about a sweet deal. They gave us $1 million a year. When the guys came over on their plane tickets, the Japanese boys. The Japanese office paid for them money for the matches the week they were there. Our guys went over there and they would get their salary, plus they get paid by the Japanese. It couldn't have been any better. And Eric brokered that deal. I was there in Hawaii at the meeting, and he did a fabulous job. And I don't know how much you know about Japanese business. You have meetings to have meetings. Talk about having meetings. And he did a magnificent job. He thought out of the box. He had the balls enough to see something in Japan, and not knowing if it would equate to the U.S., went for it. And, the rest is history. Now, I wasn't there at the end when Eric came back, so I can't comment on that. But, I mean, Eric was in a position where most of the time, I say all the time, he was a man of his word, unless he got overruled by the North Tower. I got along with Eric great. Sometimes we had our ups and downs, but I really like Eric Bischoff, and I think he was a credit to the wrestling business because we almost knocked Vince off his perch, and that's saying something.
I absolutely agree with you on that.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
100%.
I think Eric Bischoff was one of the biggest highlights of the pro wrestling business and changed it into essentially what it was. Hey, him and guys like Hall and Nash getting guys guaranteed contracts, that changed the world for everybody now.
Everybody. I mean, I made. They took care of me. I worked hard, but I made a wonderful life for my family. And Eric was a very kind guy. He would sometimes have to play the bad cop, but at heart, Eric has a heart of gold. And there's like the years go by, and I look back and I admire what he did. Eric is a very loyal guy too. I mean, if it wasn't for Eric, we wouldn't ever bring up Diamond Dallas Page, because nobody thought he was going to go anywhere. Nobody. And Eric didn't think he'd end up being on top either, but he made sure his friend had a job, that he should have a job, but Page exceeded anything any of us thought he would do. I mean, Page was old when he started wrestling, mid-30s.
Yeah.
Look what he became, He became the Dusty Rhodes of the 90s.
Yeah.
The blue-collar guy.
He really was. He was one of the biggest baby faces of the decade, not even close.
Yeah.
So in the interest of respecting your time, because we're coming up against it a little bit, but there's two things I think we want to ask about, and then we want to just play a quick game of name. We're going to drop a couple of names and just give us a quick hit of your opinion on them.
Great.
But the first thing we want to ask you about, obviously, for me, one of my favorite WCW matches of all time. I think with one of their biggest pay-per-views being Bash at the Beach, when you look back and you think of the inclusion of Dennis Rodman and over the years, I look back and I see your match with Chris Benoit, your retirement match for WCW, and that was a show stealer for me. Can you talk about that match that you guys had at Bash at the Beach 1997? Because I believe that was False Count Anywhere, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And he
Can you,
suplexed me off the top rope.
that was unbelievable. Can you talk about that match?
Yeah, I mean, I had intense matches with Chris. I mean, I don't think there was 4 guys ever in the business as intense as Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Everything he did was solid. We went from him being a stone cold babyface, beat me up when I started biting his ear after the Tyson incident with Holyfield, where the people popped for me. But that was my hometown at the time. It was snug, it was tight, and we had let a rumor out that I was going to go over and he was leaving. And all the sheets picked it up that I was going to put myself over. But I knew it was time for a change, and I became his biggest booster. I mean, I made him the world champion against Sid Vicious, and I told the story today. People ask me about Sid Vicious. I brought Sid into a room with Benoit, and I said, Sid, I'd like you to do Chris and me a favor. He said, what? He said, I need you to drop the belt tonight. And he said, I'm going to put a 5'6" guy over for the world title. He said, I don't agree with you, but for you, I'll do it. And Benoit was a special talent along with Eddie Guerrero. They transcended all that bullshit about vanilla midgets and everything. They were show stealers. And it's too bad that they both passed too soon.
I agree. That match is again. It stands the test of time. If anybody hasn't seen that match, go back. WWE Network. Go back, or what if you're in international? I guess now it's Peacock, right?
Yeah.
Go back, check it out on Peacock. Bash at the Beach, 1997. Chris Benoit, Kevin Sullivan, phenomenal show stealing match.
And the other 2 that I had with them was the one in Baltimore where we ended up in the bathroom.
The men's room, yep.
Yeah, and I had a match with him in San Francisco where he put me on a table and went to do the diving headbutt, and Jackie dove and saved me, covered me, and we bounced off that table about 4 feet. So he brought out the best in everybody, Benoit. He did.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that feud. WCW at that point had some phenomenal feuds. They had you guys going. That was around the time you had DDP and Savage feuding. It was
Right.
must-see TV at that time. I think the other one we want to ask about WCW-wise, I have to get your opinion, and I know you were there, the finger poke of doom.
Okay.
I have to ask about the finger poke of doom.
Okay. Let me ask you something. In
Yeah.
your mind's eye, you can see that they were standing in the ring, correct?
Yes.
If you were a betting man, how much bigger was Nash than Hogan?
I would say probably 4 or 5 inches, maybe.
And how much in weight? 60, 70 pounds?
I would, you know what? I wouldn't think their weight would be that different because Hulk was kind of bulked up by then again a little
Yeah,
bit.
but he wasn't like Kevin.
Yeah, no,
And-
yeah, you're probably right. Probably somewhere in the 50, 60-pound range.
Okay. And Nash was beloved and hated at the same time by the audience.
Mhm.
Let's go to Kevin's background. He was in the military. The military, the first rule is you don't surrender. You don't, if you get captured, you have to escape. And the number 1 rule is you follow orders. Kevin was a great soldier. People blame Nash for that match. What kind of match do you think Hogan would have had against Nash? In his head, Hogan thinking.
I think it would have been a very like 1980s style Hulk up. Hulk
Or,
Yep.
or,
Hulk takes the beating early, and then he does the charge and comeback, and it's like the old school Hulkster again.
or if you don't really trust the guy and you're paranoid and you've had quarrels before, are you afraid that maybe something would happen?
Could be.
Because that's just my opinion.
I
I
mean, you
think,
saw it happen in WWE with Vince and Brett. So yeah, I guess I mean, with
Yep.
creative control or not, somebody could always pull something over.
yeah, and I'm not going to say that Kevin would have swerved him and beat him, but Kevin, being the professional that he is, when I say professional, smart professional, that he
Mhm.
could have made himself look so good. In Hogan's mind, it would have been, this guy got over on me.
It's not going to work for me, brother.
You got it, brother.
Uh, um, last thing we want to do here, and then I want to just real quick mention your podcast, which is really really good. I've been listening to a few of the episodes.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, but we're just gonna. I think we're each gonna drop two names and just give us a. You don't have to give us a long thing. Just give us a quick opinion on somebody. So Andy, go ahead, drop a name to him.
All right, let's do Vince Russo.
I got along with Vince, but I hear, that he was very smart in WWF. Maybe he needed a funnel at WCW that somebody could funnel his ideas and throw the crazy ones out. Like, I'm no psychiatrist, but remember when the young kids buried Ric Flair in the desert?
Yeah.
Come on. They were literally burying him in the desert. Ric Flair's still appearing at 73 years old. I mean, I think that my personal belief is I think him and Ed Ferrara, who I happen to like very much, it came from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and that Duckman or whatever that the sitcom was. I think they were trying to do a pilot with wrestling as a sitcom, and they were going to tape it and show highlights out of it. That's my theory on it because it was like the time the Mama Luke's poured the spaghetti sauce on the How Meat.
Yeah,
Yep.
I told Bill Bush, I said, you're going to have the Italian Defamation League calling you. I think Bush thought I called him the next day because they called him. Yeah, I understand pushing the envelope, but and that was 20 years ago. You can't insult people like that. You know what I mean? I mean, it's fun and games until you really see it happening. And it isn't so fun and games. And to turn Goldberg heel, come on. I mean, I'm not and I understand why they do it for longevity in the WWE, right? How many times can a guy turn? The only time I ever had a
well, ask
problem,
Big Show.
Yeah, I was literally
yeah,
gonna say ask Joe.
yeah. So that's my thing. Why would you take the golden goose and pluck his feathers up, which they did to Goldberg?
Sure. I got one for you,
Okay,
Dave Sullivan.
one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life. Do you know what killed him? Why he got fired? Somebody that was very close to Hulk went to Hulk, and one of the fans said that Dave looked a lot like Hulk. You know
Oh
what
God.
happened to another guy? Dan Spivey?
Yeah. Is that why they made Dave cut his hair and shave his
Yep,
mustache?
yep, yep,
Wow.
That's a shame. That is a
yeah.
shame.
And he was a great guy. He played that role well. Couldn't do it today. but he's one of the. When I say this, I say with all sincerity. I try not to bullshit. It's too late in the game, and I try not to keep any animosity. But Dave Sullivan was a special person. He was a great human being.
Oh, I think
his phone died.
That's okay. We were rounding out anyway.
Yeah,
So
I love that. He reminds me so much. Remember when we interviewed Sabisco and Nick Aldis, and it was
yes.
kind of like it was the behind the scenes interviews and the more like hell, he was interviewing us for the first 15 minutes.
And I think that's why we we were going to touch on a few more things in his career, but the fact that we were having an interaction back and forth, when you do live programming, you roll with it. So anyway, unfortunately, I think his phone died, but I want to say thank you so much to Kevin Sullivan. I'll make sure to message Chris. Shout out to Chris Hughes, too, for setting this up with Kevin. I'll make sure to message him and tell him that we said thank you so much for his time. But I had a couple names I wanted to throw out. We're going to ask him about Vince. I was going to ask him about Jericho. I wanted to get his opinion on Chris Jericho as well. But really, we're just going to wrap it up then. So what I will mention, which I wanted to mention with him on the air, he has a podcast. It's been around for 2 years. It's really, really good. It's called Taskmaster Talks. You can find it on anywhere, any major podcast platform. You can go and find it on Apple. What's the other ones? I don't even know. Google Play.
Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Speaker.
I don't know if it's on those. I know it's on Apple and Google Play. I know that. So check it out. He has a social media page for them. Give it a follow. I promise you guys, you won't be disappointed. He talks much more in depth. He specifies, and the episodes aren't long. They're usually right around an hour. So he gets into a lot of topics, and you can hear he's a great storyteller, and he's able to do deep dives. So please, guys, go and check out his podcast, Taskmaster Talks. So good. I promise you won't be disappointed. But let's go. Before we get into our second thing, which is basically our interview recap, Andy, do you want to go through our next lovely sponsor?
Yeah, let's jump right into our next sponsor. Our next sponsor is All Campus Sports. All Campus is giving 20% off everything in the store, including hats, t-shirts, and cornhole sets to all subscribers. Make sure you see them on the Ocean City Boardwalk. That's All Campus Sports. I forget do you know what street it's on? I don't have that here in my notes. For All Campus? Nope. All right. Either way, they're the home of the Ramp booth every Wednesday night with Jimmy and John Coyle. So make sure you check them out. Let's dive right into the interview recap on it.
So, like you touched on it, right? Opening topic, I thought was ideal for him.
Yep.
And again, for him to, he's a watcher, so he knows the
he
programming. What were your thoughts on his views on that opening and his interaction with us?
I loved it. We've done a fair amount of these, over the last couple of years, and that was the first time anybody kind of threw questions back at us, which was cool. It was cool to kind of be in the
at least to that level anyway. Zabisco asked us a couple back and forth, but to that level where that whole first segment
was like high level.
That was like a full on like a round table almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it was really nice to have something different that we weren't 100% prepared for, but also made us think a little bit too on such a different level. Because it's not like you're talking to just another wrestler. Sullivan it was not just that. He was arguably, and might still be, one of the greatest minds in the business. With everything.
Very influential.
Yes, very influential. Had his hands in, and especially after doing the research for this and talking to him, so underappreciated and so underrated. Like, nobody ever brings him up unless we're talking about behind the scenes stuff. And you think about to all that he had, and his views on Claudio were incredible.
Yeah.
They were
I
spot
think
on, too.
yeah. So, and that's the other thing, he doesn't have an old school mind frame. He's clearly has a very, and it just shows, right? Look at the names of people he was introduced at coming into the business, right? He's talking about going into the gym and Pedro Morales is there and Killer Kowalski's around him. I mean, he was instantly around amazing minds and some of the most infamous Hall of Fame names in the business. And to learn from all of them, it's very clear that he picked up so much in his travels. We didn't even get to touch on, which I wanted to ask about, but because of our amazing opening conversation, I cut it out. I wanted to ask him. He went to Japan. He worked with Onita.
Yep.
He worked with some of the top names in Japan. But you go through and you look at everything that he's done, and that's the thing with Kevin Sullivan is people know about Kevin Nash doing the booking. People know about creative control and contracts, right?
Yep.
People don't, and they know about Eric Bischoff and his influence, but not a lot of people realize how influential Kevin Sullivan was through that entire run, at least for the successful portion of WCW. He eventually stepped away, and as he mentioned, when the ship was sinking, he wasn't around at that point. And maybe that's a contributor to not have a great mind like that around to keep steering the ship. But because I know that Bischoff has talked about in those final years, that final year or two, he himself had to step away from the creative aspect and worry about the business aspect. And that's kind of where Kevin Nash stepped in and some of these other people started stepping in. Russo was brought in. So maybe if you have him around, you don't have that issue. That being said, hearing his insight, talking about guys like Claudio, and also talking about Dusty and William Regal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was really great stuff. And hearing his story, his introduction into the business, I know we say this a lot, but I feel like it's warranted. That was one of that one is a go back and watch it again interview.
Oh, yeah. That's up there on my list for sure.
Tell your friends to go back and check it out too. If your friends don't know about us yet, tell them to like, subscribe, and follow. They can go and check out all of our past interviews. The Ken Shamrocks, the Nick Aldis, the Candice Michelle, Sid Vicious, the Fonz, Shane Douglas, D'Lo Brown, Tony Atlas, Bob Orton. The list goes on. Even to the young, uprising talent through the independent scene right now, like Mr. Marcus Mathers, who pull out your Pro Wrestling Illustrated, quite frequently is featured in the top 10 independent stars in the country today, and he's only I think 18 or 19 years old. So, you can go back and check a lot of good stuff out.
There's a lot of like independent. I've become more in tune with some of the independent stuff because of in this very ring we've done a lot of Mission Pro Wrestling shows, which is Thunder Rosa's promotion, and it seems like it's always post game when we're there. They just throw people at us. We never know who we're getting, but we've always gotten Kylan King when we've been up there. She just had 2 incredible matches with Toni Storm and Britt Baker. So like to see these people, all right, you're wrestling in a warehouse, in a beer warehouse 1 week, but then 3 weeks later you're wrestling on one of the major companies. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
I mean, we get some really, really great names on this program and then on Andy's program here on A2D in general. So go back, give it a like, give it a subscribe, give it a follow. Go back and listen to Kevin again because this one was great. It really was. And
it absolutely
again, we got to thank Kevin for his time. Thank him for those great stories and candidness and laughs. He was entertaining too. So, and again, go out, check out his podcast, Taskmaster Talks. I promise you won't be disappointed.
Not at all.
Andy, we're gonna dive very briefly, and I know you have your.
Yeah, so I'm going to take point on this because we're going to talk about it tomorrow. So this is more me grilling you on it and having a little banter back and forth because you and I haven't done this in a while.
It's been a while.
It has. Let's start with not the big one, but the bigger one of the two. Monday night, Toronto. Johnny Gargano makes his return to WWE. I want your thoughts on that moment. I'm going to bring it up tomorrow night on In This Very Ring, me and Butters, but I want you to weigh in.
It's been a long 9 months, and anyone who knows me knows that my two favorite pro wrestlers today are Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole. So to not have either of them, obviously Adam Cole due to injury, over the last few months has felt like a long period of time. However, to me, this is the right place for Johnny Gargano. There's a lot of talk of AEW. Are there matchups you would like to see? Sure. Kenny Omega is a name immediately that comes to mind to work with Johnny Gargano. Bryan Danielson is another one. But that being said, I feel like Johnny is the big winner here because I think in hindsight, there are people I think that are satisfied with their decision. You look at Swerve, you look at Keith Lee, guys that are being featured. But the proof is in the pudding. If you read the dirt sheets, and it's not unreliable dirt sheets. You look at Fightful, if you're a Meltzer believer. There's been a lot of talk of some unhappiness and things going around in AEW. There's an inflated roster that's going on right now in AEW to where, they're bringing so much of this former WWE talent in, utilizing it for 2 months, and then it's either on dark or they're not being used. In the meantime, if you go back and look at what AEW's roster was like when it started, Andy, you look at their roster, so much of their homegrown talent, gone, not featured. I know they recently started featuring Sonny Kiss again, but the names that they were trying to build the company on, right, to get the company moving, and that they were supposed to be, the names they were going to feature and give them the platform, the Nyla Roses, the Kip Sabian. So I know he's back now too, but I digress. I don't love them, but the Joey Janela's of the world. There's some that aren't there, but the Brian Cage, there's so many people that they brought in as free agents that there's so many people that are bumped. So when you look at the top of that card now, where does Johnny Gargano fit long term? Long term, where does Johnny Gargano fit? He doesn't. By his patience, and obviously part of that was becoming a new father, spending time with Candace, spending time at home, it paid off.
Absolutely.
It incidentally paid off because Vince likes blowies, and for the lack of a better term, that aren't from Linda, and he'll pay millions of dollars for them. It pays off. It opens up a spot for Johnny. Listen, we're not censored here, so
I know.
I got to be honest.
I wasn't ready for it.
I know. I have to be honest. Because of Vince has a fascination with people other than his wife. This is what we all wanted. Can you remember? I know I had it with other people. I thought I had it with you guys too. When Hunter was removed from his position.
Yeah.
And we looked at Vince and Tony. And it almost felt like, wouldn't it be something if Hunter started his own company or bought Ring of Honor at that time? He has the money.
We talked about it because I think you might have actually chimed it in on In This Very Ring one night because we kind of floated the idea of what's going to happen with Ring of Honor and where are they going to go from here. Triple H was on the backside of all his health issues with all of that. So we had talked about Triple H taking over and buying Ring of Honor or taking over WWE. But
or starting another company altogether.
Yeah, or flat out starting another company altogether. And fuel to the fire was added when Stephanie walked away.
Exactly, yeah.
So we all thought, oh, wow, something big's going to happen. Did any of us think it was going to be this? I don't think so. I don't think a single person saw it coming to be this. But to get where we're at now and to see that it's Triple H versus Tony Khan, essentially is what it really is. This is Triple H's game to win.
It is, and because there's nobody. Even when you look at Meltzer or listen to Busted Open Radio and you listen to Bully Ray and Dave LaGreca and all those guys talk, everybody says, no matter what the ratings said, when the Black and Gold was the Black and Gold, that was the best professional wrestling program, bar none. When Hunter was running the show with Regal, with Shawn Michaels, with Road Dogg, they ran the best wrestling program in the world, at least in the United States. You know, some people would argue NJPW, and I'm not gonna dispute that. It's a great program.
At work the other day that if you're gonna NXT is just, I won't say it's stagnant because that's not fair to say. You know what I mean? But I remember a time where the NXT title and the thing that whoever was involved with that was high profile, meant a lot. You wanted to put your eyes on it. You know, now it's like, oh, Braun's fighting who? I mean, yeah, it's cool that it's going to be him and Tyler Bate in a few weeks.
You know what, though?
At Worlds Collide. But I haven't cared, and this sounds so bad because I like Braun Breaker. Nothing has excited me about the NXT title picture.
But I think that NXT has pieces. Carmelo Hayes is phenomenal.
I agree.
Some people love or hate Grayson Waller. I'm not a big fan, but I could see he's growing on me as a heel, although he hasn't been featured in the ring very much.
He's just neutral. For me, he's right in the middle.
There's Solo Sequoia or whatever his name is. Uso. The other Uso. There's talent there. Yep. You know, I love Duke Hudson. I think he's so underutilized. But there's a lot of great. I think he could be a main roster heel that people would be like, "F this." Like the next Wade Barrett when Barrett was in his prime. He has the look similar to him. He has that kind of UK where they always try to make like UK characters hateable. It seems for whatever reason. But he's just such a good heel. But there's hope for NXT because they've brought back a couple of people. They have brought back Road Dogg, who I think may be working with NXT. Ryan Katz is a name not a lot of people know about, but Ryan Katz has been involved with NXT Black and Gold all through that phenomenal run and was a big figurehead in the creative and behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They just brought him back and signed him down to NXT. So there's hope.
Absolutely.
And there's talent. There's talent there to work with.
And I won't say that NXT as a whole is bad right now either, because I mean it kind of breathed new life into Mandy's career and everything that she's doing with the girls in Toxic Attraction.
It's been great.
It's been phenomenal. The tag team division isn't bad. It's not the best on the planet, but they're finding their groove again with them. But it feels like a show. It doesn't feel like its own brand. There's no cult following for it anymore.
Yeah, it is getting better. I will tell you that it is getting better. This might be the time to maybe start jumping on board because I think you're going to start seeing changes in the program, but you're going to see some of the talent. And this, if you're not watching, this might be a time to get on board with some of the talent that is there. But to loop it back around, you look at WWE right now since Hunter has come into power. Cross is back.
Yep.
Ciampa is look at all the feature talent. First of all the secondary titles, the Intercontinental title, U.S. title now featured. You're seeing tag teams. I
love that they essentially headline every Raw and SmackDown right now.
Agreed.
That's what I wanted months ago, and when we talked about unifying the titles, I talked about it at nauseum.
Yeah.
And we got it, and I love it.
They're adding to the depth of the tag team division. They bring Hit Row back, and I think you're going to see more, whether they put a few people back together, or they go like, I'm not ruling out that DIY might be a thing at some point.
How apropos is Johnny coming back to Toronto?
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was unbelievable. It was such a great spot to do that. I mean, that crowd was so... He got the biggest pop of any NXT debut.
Mhm.
It's like NXT star coming up to the main roster. And to do it there, to do it in Toronto with that crowd, it's all perception. So for those who aren't familiar, who are watching this program and see this guy, they're going to be like, that guy must be a pretty big deal. And then you have him cut that amazing promo where he goes through all of his accolades, where really Johnny was Mr. NXT. When you really look at it, it's just, it speaks for itself. But I look at this roster and you see Cross. You're seeing Ricochet be featured. You're seeing Gunther be featured. You're seeing Dakota Kai is brought back. Io Shirai or Io Sky, whatever the fuck they call her now. She's up. You're looking at all of this talent, and there's more. The list goes on. This is Hunter's new WWE.
Yep.
There's talent there, but it's not just Roman. And I love Roman. I could watch that program for another year. I really could. However, you can't only make that the program where you literally only care about the bloodline and Bianca Belair. You just can't do that.
And I think that's why, like you said, you could watch it for another year. I think that's why I cringed, like subconsciously cringed a little right there.
Well, I don't need him to hold both titles. If he drops one of the titles, I'm good.
But just because we focused, and I throughout the night I've been scrolling through Twitter and keeping up with both shows, see if anything relatively big has happened. I haven't caught anything yet, but it's all just Roman, Sammy, Usos on SmackDown, and I'm like, that turns.
You know what
off.
though? I'm not turned off. First of all, I think Sammy has been phenomenal.
Oh,
and I think
Sammy,
by the way, Kevin Owens, another name.
Yep.
Look at these names being featured. Elias or Ezekiel is now gone so that his brother Elias can grow his beard back and he can come back. Look at what's happening. They're still featured. Drew McIntyre. Randy Orton is going to be a staple until he doesn't want to be. Look at Riddle's spot now.
Yep.
They are now introducing the new wave. This is the new WWE. It's not just big guys like Roman, Brock, and Drew and Lashley. There's going to be a spot for everybody, and guys are going to be featured in the main event picture. And I am so excited for it. I think it's the right place for Johnny. I think Johnny would not go there if he didn't trust what the vision is. I think Johnny wouldn't go there if he didn't see the way that Tommaso Ciampa, in a very short period of time, has suddenly become a featured act, because a lot of people hold them in the same ilk. And if Ciampa can get that just from Vince being gone a few weeks, Johnny is Hunter and Sean's boy.
Yep.
Him and Cole were like their guys.
Well, look after Johnny Kick's Theory on Monday after he super kicked
So
him.
good.
That was Shawn Michaels.
Oh, absolutely.
He did, that was Shawn.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I was on board with Theory at first. However, it got very force-fed. The Money in the Bank thing totally turned me off from it. Because, first of all, you knew he was going to win as soon as he was put in the match. It's very forced. Now that you don't have the Vince's chosen one anymore, that storyline's dead to me, but you're still running the same kind of character out there. My hope is that Johnny somehow takes the Money in the Bank off of him before he cashes it in. We'll see how it plays out. But anyway, this is the perfect spot for Johnny. It was not AEW. I think Johnny would have got lost in the shuffle eventually there, because there's just too many names and too many friends at the top of the heap for Johnny, and I think, to make it through ultimately. So I'm very happy for this decision, and this does show me, seeing him and Ciampa featured at the top of the card now, that we're going to start to get that shift.
Yep. And then one last little topic I want to go over with you.
Yeah, we can go through this one quickly.
Yeah, Wednesday night, Punk and Moxley unified the AEW Championship. I'm gonna get on my soapbox tomorrow about all this, so because I have a pretty big soapbox. I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna let you talk about it. Obviously, Moxley won, but lay it out there.
First of all, I don't understand the layout of the show. You can't not make your world title your main event. That just makes sense. And there was nothing that happened after that trios match that that made you feel like this needs to close the show. You didn't have somebody come out and debut. You had nothing. You had Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega yelling at each other. Most people
Omega's promo air.
No.
Okay.
Most people don't know the heat between Omega and Ospreay. So there's no pulling in. This is what AEW does, and I'm an AEW guy. You know this. I have liked their programming. You know, I'm not as critical, other than fucking JR still on the air, and he's getting worse and worse and worse. Other than that, I am not as critical on AEW. I've been a big proponent for that's been the best program for the last year. You know this.
Well
I just haven't been on the air the last year. That being said, this is what AEW does. It's almost like when they debut somebody that nobody knows who they are, and they act like you're supposed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows the heat between Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega. There's no need for that to close the show. You could have did that in the middle. I think the shock of the squash, considering that they built up to the show, or to before those matches even happened, that TNT was going to let them, or TBS, whatever channel they're on, was going to let them stay on the air. You could have started at 5 minutes before 10 and kept and gone, because they've gone 5-10 minutes past the time.
Yep.
The shock of a squash and that image of Punk getting carried out, where he looks back at everybody and everybody's cheering him getting squashed, that would have A, been more effective. B, I don't understand it to begin with, because A, I know they're doing the rematch at All Out, whatever. The only way this works for me is if you're trying to turn Punk heel, okay? Which I don't think you need this, because Punk works heel half the time anyway. And
yeah.
If he wants to shit on a crowd, he does. If he doesn't, whatever. But the idea of Punk working as a heel in Chicago is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And if the idea that MJF maybe interferes and helps Punk to take out Moxley, you know, as my buddy put it earlier, MJF's going to get a hero's welcome no matter where he comes back.
Yep.
Even in Chicago. So maybe they think like MJF with his heat in Chicago before will help to draw heat on Punk. It's never going to happen. So they're going to, if that's the idea, and I'm not saying it is, it's just something that myself and one of my other buddies have been kind of talking about today. It's never, it's just not going to work, because you're going to go off of your arguably your first or second biggest pay-per-view of the year. I know Double or Nothing was like almost like their Mania, but I look at All Out as their WrestleMania. I think it's their best show of the year, usually. Yeah. Although the card is very subpar this year. I just look at it and I'm like, you're going to go out and you're trying to build this heel. It's almost going to come off like Austin at WrestleMania 17. It's going to be forced. It's going to take away from a moment. It's not going to work.
No,
Punk is booed out of half the buildings already anyway. So what is the difference? I just didn't get it. I think they could have just waited, honestly. I think if anything, well, I guess you couldn't really do the squash at the pay-per-view either, because
we'd be burning people at the stake if that happened.
Well, he would I mean, Moxley would be the ultimate heel in that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know how they would work. It just makes no sense to me.
And again, like I said, I'm gonna bring your shovels and your pitchforks tomorrow. We're burying stuff tomorrow night. Yeah. But
yeah. I mean, that's all I have on it. I don't get it. I don't like it. I'm over Moxley. To me, it's rinse and repeat. He bleeds every match, and it lost the effect of it at this point.
And because you brought it up, I'm going to say this. When we were talking about it the other day at work, I actually think it was yesterday, oddly enough, we were having that conversation. Jon Moxley doesn't fit the AEW mold anymore. He just exists. He shows up, fights a little bit, bleeds, and leaves. and it's just not. It doesn't work with anything. The storylines with involving Moxley just seem like such a huge mess, and for lack of a better phrase, a clusterfuck. So it doesn't fit that mold, and I say mold very, very loosely. But
Do you remember their first pay-per-view? Do you remember the matchup with Cody and Dustin and the blood shed in that match?
Mm-hmm.
And even with Cody, the bleeding became too much. But do you remember the blood shed in that match and the emotion that I felt watching that match? It felt like, oh, this is a blood war.
And you're
This
talking
is
about their
something
first
special.
official AEW show, right? Not
Yes.
All In.
Double or nothing.
Okay.
When you had Dustin versus Cody,
Yeah.
brother versus brother,
One
and
of
now
my
look at
favorite pay-per-views ever.
it now. Like what I see Moxley bleed, and like it doesn't add anything to any match from except for like maybe the it's not called War Games, whatever they call it.
Anarchy Rules or whatever.
No, it's not. Whatever that cage. What do they call the tube cage?
Oh Jesus!
I can't even remember.
I can't.
I always call it War Games. Anyway, they're War Games match.
War Games Light.
Yeah. Whenever you like look at that, and that it makes sense. You want to have a bunch of guys bleed and stuff. Show the war of it. Hey, the NWA and WCW did that every year for years. It makes sense because of the brutality of the match. Hell in a Cell makes sense. Jon Moxley on Rampage bleeding 3 minutes into a match in a meaningless fucking show that's an hour taped. It's gone. It doesn't mean anything. So. And I like Jon. He's better than that. He's becoming a GCW deathmatch, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But this version in AEW at the top of the card doesn't work for me. That's just me. That's my opinion.
Yeah, when you bring up the pay-per-views, me and Jax, we have the fortune to be able to go watch these in a pay-per-view, in a movie theater. And there's usually, 10 people at most in these, because it's not widely publicized that you can do it. So they're the diehard fans. The numbers are dwindling. The last few events that we've been at, like I think the last time it was just 3 of us in there. And everybody's walking out going, what did we just watch?
Yep.
Because nothing, other than like a debut or a return, nothing crazy has happened. They've just been, it's like a longer Dynamite is all it feels like. And I've got 2 words that sum up everything. Tony Khan. So join us tomorrow night for the burial, once again, of Tony Khan.
Yeah. Again, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it to you boys tomorrow night to really deep dive into this stuff and much more. But again, I want to personally thank, and Andy wants to thank, and A2D and Tom Arnone want to thank Kevin Sullivan for joining us tonight. Again, top-notch interview, one of our best guests. Really put us over at the top, too. Holy shit, didn't he?
Yeah. It was like Premier Wrestling. I was like, sir, I need you to come on all the time, please.
Yeah, I mean, he really put us over big. But, hey, listen, thank you to Kevin. Thank you to Chris Hughes for setting us up with Kevin. Really phenomenal interview. And thank you to Andy for joining me, producing the show as well.
Absolutely, buddy. I love jumping on the air with you and talking a little bit. And
yeah, absolutely.
We didn't really argue tonight. We had nothing really to argue about.
No, I mean, I don't always have to argue with you. Plus, I save it for your show, and that way I can get on Butters.
Rile me up on my own show?
Well, no, it's usually Butters now. I come at him.
That's fair. That's fair.
But and you know what? One of these days I got to come and hop on your show. I just, me. I mean, I haven't had many free nights, and when I do on a Saturday night, but I would like to join you boys.
Some of that might change here soon, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll dive in.
But we want to thank Dr. Paul Vidal, since we're thanking people. We want to thank Dr. Paul Vidal, Specialized Physical Therapy, his 2 locations, Burlington and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, for sponsoring this incredible episode. Chrome, thank you so much for allowing me to come on and take us home.
Yeah, for myself, for Andy, for our sponsors, and everybody here at A2D Radio, we want to thank you, the fam, for tuning in. Like, subscribe, follow YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all social media platforms, Twitter. And hey, make sure your friends go back and do all the same. Check out our shows. And we got a lot of good stuff. Football season's around the corner. We're going to be starting some hockey and basketball. Camp is coming up. Baseball playoffs. Hot Philadelphia Phillies team right now. There's so much for you guys to get excited about on A2D Radio. And jump on, be a part of it. Join the fam. So for myself, for Andy, and everybody here, we love you guys. Have a safe, have a positive weekend. Hug somebody. Let them know you care about them.
Later, guys.